Okay, hey everybody, I'm Casper. Thanks so much for joining. We'll be looking at this demo I've been working on called Oaken. So first I want to show you a little bit. I've been working on like this demo app to sort of show it off, where we're doing stuff with some factories here. And then I'll show you what the fixtures version will look like, and I'll show you what I kind of do with Oaken. And then finally I'll show you like a pull request I've been working on for a friend Dom and his app where he was using fixtures and converting that over. Let's see, there's always something in the chat. Share screen a little larger by get away from factories by choosing original size. Oh, I don't know. Oh, cool. Okay. So let's start with this. So usually what happens when I join a project that uses factories, it ends up looking kind of like this. I'm working in this I was trying to figure out what kind of domain model we want for this. So I just came up with like a record shop because it's not gonna impede on anybody's business these days, like an inventory management. And typically what it looks like is you'll find a test and we're seeding a whole bunch of different models that we're creating together, and then we tie them all together. And in my experience, when I worked on systems that use factories, it's kind of like, okay, I just joined a project. I've seen this for the first time, but I'm not quite sure what's going on, how these things are connected, and everything's anonymous. So I can see that it works. But then what happens when I then have to make my own new test, like a new separate controller test or something? What else do I need? I can glue a bunch of factories together. But and the test passes now, but did it do everything correctly? That was sort of always my feeling with it. Um, it's setting a whole bunch of state, and I'm using mini tests here. I know RSpec is kind of different in terms of how you set things up, but that's all right. So, and then over time as well, what people are seeing is that factory-based versions kind of end up slowing down because you're seeding this kind of stuff before every test. So these 30 times, you'd run this block every 30 times and create, 30 times however many records we're doing here. Um, and the domain model I chose here is sort of fairly simple. We have these like shops, and then those have users on them, which are actually like multiple. So you could be on multiple shops, and you could also have multiple different locations. I don't think I actually forgot to assign the user to that. So that's interesting. Speaking of domain modeling issues, then there's artists that have several releases, and those releases can sell different editions. Here I'm hiding that there's also like a media attached to that you could have an edition that's only on CD or only on vinyl. Again, I chose a record shop because they don't really exist anymore. Well, they do, but it's probably not going to impede on anybody's actual business these days. And you can make these purchases of certain additions to your shops. It's someone else. And then you can distribute those purchases across different locations. So if you purchase 50 of like whatever this edition is, then you can distribute them across. If you have multiple locations, you could distribute them there. The idea was to have some sort of, I don't know, you'd have some sort of management UI where you'd have like a list of all the purchases and then how you chose to distribute those across to different locations or whatever over time or something like that. Um, and then finally, you'd run the test however many times. This is just, obviously simulated, but we really want to make sure this purchase is valid, apparently, which also has no validations, but, so that's typically my experience of what it looks like with factories. And then over time, they kind of get slow. I was actually really surprised when I ran this because it's fairly fast. It takes like a second or something like that. How do I do that now? Test. Chores. I don't remember. Did I do it this way? I did. Uh, Not too bad, actually. It's like half a second. Yeah, yeah, roughly. Um, what else we have? And even for like, if you bump it to, so the test harness itself seems like it's actually not too bad in this case. I don't know if it's just because I didn't add a ton of data. Also not too bad for like 1,000 of these. Yeah, it's like 375. So if we did this in like thousands of tests here, it wouldn't be too bad. So I'm not sure. That doesn't really match my experience, what I've seen in production or in actual apps. Um, but over time, that's what I've seen, that it becomes slower and becomes difficult. And what I find too, if you compare with, like say, a different test, where sometimes the setup is fairly similar, but it's slightly different. And I'm always a little bit like, okay, so what changed here? I find that it's not me learning the domain model doesn't really amortize across tests. And it's still difficult for me to figure out what a domain model is doing because it's all so anonymous. Um, so, okay, let's see. How are we doing on time? We're doing pretty fine on time. Any questions so far with this? So how I've laid things out? What are people using now before switching to? Yeah, that's kind of interesting. What are people actually using today? Are you on factories or like, or fixtures as well? I showed the fixtures versions a little bit just to see what factory bought. Yeah, definitely. And also, by the way, I'm not trying to say that you have to migrate completely away from FactoryBot or anything like that. I'm just showing you some like alternatives essentially. Yeah, everybody's on FactoryBot. That makes sense. Um, FactoryBot primarily. Yep, yep, yep. Fair. Sort of question is, would factories press traits? It's very good when traits are defined well. I feel like the devil is in the details there, Jamie. You're saying, have you experienced the code base for factories plus traits? My experience is very good when traits are defined well. I feel like in my experience, it all lies in that, well, if things are defined well, then typically they work pretty well. I just feel like what I mostly see is that teams having maybe less than stellar domain modeling, and then it gets bogged down even more by like factories or fixtures. And so this came out of Oaken Finger, we're going to start talking about in a little bit, came out of me both working on systems that use factories and then later on a system that use fixtures. And I found like, well, I feel like there's more we could do here. Um, let's see. Oh, you're trying Oaken. That's cool. Thank you, Cicely. Cecile. Um, let's see. And then yeah, if there's traits to define well, they can work well, but I don't know. It's not always my experience. Uh, Tiara is just saying, in my experience, the domain evolves, but the traits get left behind. Yeah, that's also the other part with this. Franken factories. Yeah, a trap of factors can be Hassman associations. That's the other thing I've seen too, where like here I'm sort of being explicit and putting everything together myself. But then there's also, you could have potentially like a purchase factory that then sort of generates it all by itself. So it's nice and clean, but then it does a whole bunch of stuff for you because became, yeah. Cool. Let's see. Cool, cool, cool. I wonder if there's anything else I need to see with this. So that's sort of been my experience there. And again, yeah, um, the other thing I've experienced with factories is that they require a lot of discipline to get right. That's kind of what you were talking about, Jamie, where if the traits are defined well, then they can work well. But I feel like it's more in that like if, and it seems like it's pretty difficult, at least from the teams I've been on and the teams I've seen, doing some of the consulting stuff, is that it's kind of things are difficult and they're always going to be difficult to some extent. Uh, let's see. Anything else to this? Check more chat. Potentially, I'm definitely going to show off. So you were saying here, Jamie, an argument here seems to be that fixture slash open might make it easy to do things right. I was actually already struggling with just setting fixtures up for this demo app. So I don't know about that. I kind of would not suggest that. Let's see if we go to that one. So do fixtures here. So I've set it up with fixtures instead, where now we could slim a lot of this down because we have like a stable. The nice thing about fixtures is you'll have a stable data set. It's just that maintaining that stable data set is actually pretty difficult. So you could pull in more of the context here where, but at very least with fixtures, because you're naming things, at least to me, it becomes a little bit clearer over time what's going on and how things fit together and what's going on in your domain model. Um, so you can have some of the setup being a little bit similar because you're then amortizing the cost across several tests. Like if this is this record shop that you set up once, and then that's the same name you're using for all your tests when you're involving a record shop, suddenly that cost starts to pay itself down. So if you have like hundreds of test cases where you're already reusing this one thing, at least to me, that makes it a lot easier to conceptualize what's going on in an app, as opposed to like, to me, it seems like factories are optimized for isolation. So you sort of always want to pretend that you don't know what the rest of the app is, which is cool on one level, but at least in my experience, in when I'm then using it, like I find that intermediate gap to be really difficult to figure out what's then going on. So I would kind of rather just admit that we're making an app for people and then we'll tie things together now. So this is part of what it looks like with fixtures. You could have like a table name essentially, and then you could pass it in like a known ID to fetch it. So here's what it looks like on the side. Let's see here. So we then got a test fixtures directory, which has a bunch of stuff in it, all these YAML files. So I'll just pick one here. Here's an artist. I set something up fairly simply. We've got two lines here. Then it has sort of like this additions with this artist that I'm just trying to, my recommendation for doing this kind of data is also to be fairly vivid. That's why the names are like this. So, and then we got some media that's also, I used a plural name, so I had to do some extra setup here. And then I've got this edition that has something in here. And then there's a record shop as well, also fairly low. Got some releases here. uh, tied back to the artist, is which is then the other file we just saw. And it has this that it happens to be an album, and here's the user as well. I can assign myself to several shops, which is nice. Here I'm just ideally you actually want to. I couldn't remember what you're supposed to be doing here, but it's something where if you actually have this user is using hash secure password. So to actually assign a proper database digest, you want to use like something bcrypt in here, but I don't remember what the syntax is. So I just like hard coded it. A bit one else to this, and that worked well enough for this demo. And then let's see. I see a bunch of stuff in chat. Let's see, David, you're saying here factories do need to be valid, yes. So if there are things that aren't needed to make a factory valid, it's not strictly required. Probably better to move into a trade. That's very true. Yeah. Um, let's see. Brandon here is saying I'm really excited about using Oaken for seeds and consistency across dev test production and automated preview environments. Yes, that's basically the idea. We'll get to that idea. And then I think I had some releases, some more record shops, the media. And I was struggling to set this up earlier, just when I was working on this to try to figure out all these like modeling things I've set up and then where do I have that? And then I had to name in fixtures, you have to name everything so that it's consistent between different test runs. So you have to give everything, it ends up, in my experience, when you're working with fixtures, it end up become these like really long, kind of gnarly, sometimes names, and then you have to remember them across files. And here I'm already cheating where I'm just calling this like a first person and a first shop, but it's kind of only related to what do we have the shops at? No, that's not even it. Oh, it's actually, I screwed up. It's because there's a location I called first shop. But yeah, I found it difficult with these like 8, 10 models I set up and didn't already tying them together. It's kind of difficult. And here I'm not even mixing data from different accounts. So what I see in real life is once you start having some of these cross-cutting tables that you use in like users, for instance, you'd have multiple different accounts that you then have multiple different users on, and they're all kind of mixed together. If you want to have sometimes a realistic data set. Another thing to keep in mind with fixtures is that people do go like hardwire with them, where they think like every iteration has to be in the database or in these fixture files, which is typically not what you want to do. You want like 1 to 2 representative cases, but where that line is always kind of difficult because it's different case to case and app to app. So that's also kind of tough to say. But overall, it looks like this. If you have these 10 different files or whatever, you'll have to hop through 10 different files. And my issue is that it usually becomes really difficult to see what's going on in your app, which is the whole point of fixtures, because fixtures to me are about this like storytelling aspect. How does my app actually work? How does these models actually relate together? What comes first? What comes next? But you have to piece it together by like, oh, so there's an addition here. Okay, cool. So now I can jump into the additions and it has now this release thing. Okay, cool. That's there, and then we have an artist. Okay, and these are just data attributes, title and kind. Okay, so now I could jump to, where's it artist again? Did I set up artist? Did I forget? There we go. And then now we've like resolved it all the way to like only a data object there or whatever. Like there's no extra associations there. Cool. One nice thing about fixtures though, if you have a user, for instance, and here I'm setting up, so I have like a join table. I both have join tables between locations and these like the record shops. So users can belong to many record shops and record shops can have many different users as well. Same thing with these locations where you're assigning a specific person to like work in a specific location. I don't know, maybe they migrate and can work in two or whatever. This is kind of like a thought of example. But fixtures will let you just like assign directly to the like locations, for instance, and then it'll generate the assignment in the background. So if you don't have any extra data on like this join table, I'll just show the assignment. Um, it'll generate it for you. But in typically what I see when I do this kind of stuff with like a membership, is that here? Yeah. I might put like the role on a membership. So you could potentially have multiple memberships between a user and like a specific account or shop. Or you could have like one membership that has multiple different roles on it or something like that. So kind of store it as, because that's kind of where it is. It's not on the user itself, but it's what it belongs to in a way. Oh, it makes sense. So that's what that looks like. Let's see now. And then there's also what tends to happen in a lot of apps is that there's a third thing. There's not just the test data that's either like factories or fixtures or a mixture of both. There's a third thing as well. It's also called seeds, which usually either is non-existent or like dilapidated or kind of a mess as well, because it's like a third thing that's now kind of separate from all the other stuff that we're making. And it's kind of, at least it just gets really difficult, I feel like, for most teams where, under pressure to ship and just want to ship good stuff, that it's just like, oh, we got this third thing now. What do we do with that? And what's supposed to go in here as well? So that's kind of difficult at least. Let's see. So enough about that. Let's see. I set to the right branch here. Okay. So maybe we shouldn't start here. Let's go back to that test we had before. So this looks fairly similar to what we just had with fixtures, where before I just called it one because that's kind of what fixtures end up calling it. Like it looked like I just showed it looked like this because fixtures sort of default to calling things one and two. It'll generate two for you, and then they have these like bogus values that you have to fill in. But that's not really that descriptive. So what I find that I like is trying to have more of like a story element in there and being more explicit that there's this record shop called Warehouse Inc. or whatever that has a bunch of stuff going on. Has a bunch of different locations as well. We'll get to that. See more in the chat. Let's see, Jay here, you're saying use fixtures and I like the rigor required to have the modeling mental and DB clear in mind. Yes. Name the fixtures reinforces that. My drawback is I'd like to call contextual fixtures on tests to avoid endless scrolls of fixtures. Yes. Very true. I think we'll get to see that. I think we'll actually get to that now. Let's see, was there anything else? You're another comment to scroll in. I find that seeds end up being ad hoc, and then there's some crazy DB singing that needs to happen to get reasonable data to develop off of. Yes, also that. Record shops, where it come from, so this is just an integration essentially, where in the fixtures version, Rails defines them for you. In Oaken, we sort of do. Oh, I scrolled through. I show you that too in the test helper, where instead of previously it looked like this, and I'm including factory bot methods there, but I just set it to set up use all fixtures. That's what Rails generates by default. You can see here it'll run all those fixture files we saw before, and then they'll in alphabetical order apparently. But then if you want to use Oaken instead, what you could do is just include this Oaken test setup module where it both supports Rails's built-in parallelized testing. So you get that for free and just have it working. But essentially what we're doing, I'm taking kind of the fixtures approach and then hopefully making it better. So here we'd actually see all our data ahead of time like fixtures do, but hopefully in a way that's easier to understand all the connections between them. So let's see, well, you saw that in here. Did I do anything here? Okay, that's fine. So instead of starting in like a test directory, what we'll actually do is start in DB seeds and upgrading that. So this is kind of what it would look like. You'd have these like identifiers that you then load from. You should probably look at that first, actually. So within DB seeds, I'm now setting up a further nesting where I'm choosing to share this between both the development and test environments because I'm just putting these files in db/seeds. If I put some of these in test or development as well, they would only get created in that environment. So let's see. What do we actually start with this? What if we start with this, like data setup? So so because Oaken is setting up to find this data first, what we'll actually do when you call that, we'll try to look up DB seeds, and then we'll actually look up both nothing and then like whatever the current environment is. Could be either development or test, and then the data you have in there. And then we'll look up what is it like? I think this is actually what the bash syntax is, sort of like that. So we'll both find a data.rb file, which is that one right here. Or we could also nest it further into as many different like directories and files that we kind of want to. Because what we're saying up top here is I don't really care what's in this matcher. Just match everything you can, and it'll just load that. And I don't care what the order is in between that. So if you care about the order, you want to add like an extra symbol in here, for instance. Let's see something in the chat. Is the search for a name depth or breadth first? I actually don't know. I don't know how to answer that. How you're asking about that. This is kind of what it looks like. We'll just do a loop through DB seeds as well. I don't know how to loop. We're kind of doing both at once. It kind of is whatever Ruby returns. Do we actually want to see that in the source first? Let's see. Do we want to do that? I think I have it in the loader. Like, I don't know if this is going to answer your question. This is what it looks like. So we're grabbing all those identifiers, and then we'll try to glob and find them in there. And for each of whatever we find, we'll load them. And here's that matcher I just showed you before. Let's see, there's stuff in the chat. I think it's breadth, and that tripped me up a little. I looked too. Yep. Okay, cool. Cool, cool. We'll get to that in a little bit. Back to that. So now that we're doing this stuff, yeah, so we can kind of get a lot of flexibility by setting things up in this way. We could both have a data.rb file. We could have like deeply nested files as well. So we do dbcs data, like a specific table. Like if you have like those, if you want to split it out, so you have these artist tables or whatever, then you could do whatever you want in here. You can then give it a symbol. If you want it to be exposed as something you can reference in test or reference in other of these like seed files, and then whatever some calls, whatever. So for instance, if we do, because this is wired into DB seeds, now I'm just going to start it over here. And so now I think we got artist to create. Let's see, do we have that actually? Artist. You can't use the structure in here. What is that? I want name. Oh, I spelled. Yeah, so it's sort of already added in there and found out. So I didn't have to set anything, change anything in my seeds file. It would sort of automatically get picked up because it's sort of dynamic in that way. Let's see, I'm actually going to delete this now. Cool. So I'll show you what it looks like in here. Now I'm trying to set it up. Another thing we're trying to do in Oaken is having, let's see, the data file here. So we're trying to break away from what fixtures do, which requires you to go across like all these 10 different files and then trying to figure out how the things are structured together to just kind of make the associations more obvious, and then the data is right there as well. So for instance, here you can start creating an artist with a given title or whatever. Here, well, it's a name here. And then you can give it this reference so you can then use and test if you want to expose them. Generate a different artist as well, generate a release for them, specify what kind it is, attach it back to that artist which you set up here. We then generate a specific edition for these releases that you can release across like both a CD and a vinyl in this like domain modeling. Same thing here, if you want some extra things. And because this is all for your development seats as well, it kind of makes sense to add a little bit extra. First thing here, this is kind of similar. Here I'm giving it a name again. And now because we're processing, so we process the data thing here first in however many files we have for that. We'll then go to the next one for these record shops. So now we're in DB seeds, record shops, and then we can give it a name again and sort of set up these relationships in the same way where we can also give it a name. That's how we reference it in that controller test file. Where was that at here? So this is what becomes that .warehousing that you can reference. I just think it looks slightly nicer than like fixtures and giving it a symbol, because we will also like raise if it's not defined. Let's see. And as well, you can find another thing you can do with this is actually do, I think you do this. Wait, I should probably do it this way. Blah, blah. Print it out. Oh, we're probably going to get a ton of different names now. Do we have it here? Here? We're good at yelling at us. Good one. There we go. Okay. Is that not? Where is that at? Oh, it's here. Okay. So it'll actually point back to, one of the things I try to make sure of is when you have these things that are dynamically defined, I really want to have a link back to the file and line that it is at. So you can see here it says record shops warehouse Inc. Line 1. And that's the thing we just saw. So you can see how it ties back to that symbol you passed. Yeah. And now I can attach users to that if I want like some locations there and I want to assign like a specific user. I can do it this way. If you have a second shop, you can do that a second location as well. If I want to generate a purchase, I can do that. And here I'm passing in that addition we set up earlier. So it's hopefully a little bit clearer when we're attaching back to something we set up earlier. And then I can do this like distribution thing as well. I can pass it back to first and second, those locations. And then these don't really last outside of this file, because I'm not giving it a name. So the other thing I'm trying to figure out with this Oaken stuff is what do we actually need to name? Because fixtures require you to name everything, which is where there are a little bit like a drudgery associated with them. But you don't always need that. Sometimes the association is enough. Like the fact that I have a record shop and then I could just do here record shop as well. And then you could do record shop locations at first if I don't really care that it has one. But I'm trying to be mindful of how I'm setting up the story of the data. Like, oh, there's this person called Casper for whatever reason. And they work at this shop. And so you can start building a little bit of like mental model of how things actually put together. closer to real life. Let's see, what are we actually doing with time? Oh, let's see, yeah, someone else invited in. Cool. So having a chat here. At least you're all familiar. Cool. And it's also possible to use like your own domain modeling stuff. We see it, these create calls really just return active record objects. So if you have some extra domain modeling you've done or whatever that you want to use to set things up and kind of use that to exert your system, you can kind of do that as well. So I set up a very basic version. There's that purchase there. That just, generates another active record model or whatever that you don't have to think about. But you just want to use that same stuff to try to figure out, well, how's your domain modeling doing and how you're tying things together. That's sort of the idea. Yeah, cool. And let's see what else. So now we kind of loaded all that stuff up. Let's see. Admit someone else. Cool, cool, cool. So one more thing that we got as well, in addition to this stuff or all this like setup we got, we're also got like a secret setup phase that kind of happens when you call seed for the first time. We'll only run this once, but we'll basically load as if you had done, I'll show you this. We're reusing that same logic here, just like lookup logic. So you have, if you're writing in setup as well, we're kind of using this to load up a separate thing. We could both have a setup.rb file here, and that's also per environment. Let's see, you could set up like specific defaults you want. So for instance, if you want all your users in your system to be able to like type it in with password and password confirmation, so you don't have to repeat that everywhere. You can also have these like, we'll get into loaders a bit as well. You can set up like these cross model defaults. So one of the things I've been trying to think of with all this data modeling and these things, that there's a lot of these records that have attributes that are actually named the same across different models. And so I've been finding it interesting to try to think about what would it look like if they're just in a way there and they kind of function the same way, given the same values, to where it's like safe to inject them. I can't remember if I got my faker syntax right here. We'll see. Oh, this is very nice. So basically the idea is if you have like in a large app or whatever, if you have 50 models or whatever, 20 models that all have a name or a title or whatever, you could set it once and kind of forget about it. And in the cases where it matters, like in the case of something like this warehouse where, no, I want to make sure I give it this one, this name, you can then override it and give it that explicit default. But then for the most part, you don't care about it. Like for instance, and you can do that with any attribute as well. We're just like, I just want to set this amount to be whatever it is by default. So showing you this in an app as well. Let's see, what are we doing on time? I think we're doing okay. So we can set that up. And then the other thing that's kind of, actually, I should probably show you that in the app. Is everything making sense so far? I know I'm like going kind of fast with things. There's one more thing I want to show you in the demo app, and I think we'll move to a pull request that is set up for someone else. So I'll actually show you when now, because I'm used to how Oaken works, it's sort of my preferred way to do domain modeling, where I'm also a fan of doing was, well, it's my own technique that I just call riffing, where I basically like open up a brand new file and then start typing stuff in there. And then over time, I'll have something in there, and then I'm just using Oaken structure to sort of figure out what the domain modeling. So this was the original file I wrote to then keep referring back to and set the factories up for that. And how else would I do? There's some slight changes here. This was slightly different, but then I had to battle Rails with it. I'm like, this is a demo app. I don't want to have this figured out. I could add another method that I set up somewhere. This is not, built into anything. This is something I would write if I wanted to like distribute an artwork or whatever. But this is a way to think about how my data is structured, how things put together, because you can get, this is like 28 lines. We get a ton of really quick value out of this kind of stuff. So I think I spent like an hour on this or something, and then I was having way too fun like generating names for for artists and releases, and so that's kind of what I ended up doing. But it was kind of fun. Yeah, potentially I have no idea where, like, I'm not an AI expert at all. But at least for me, and so this is in this demo app, it's a little more that like idealized version where there isn't a ton of data associated with all these things, but I think there's something really interesting. We're both mixing these things together of like both the associations and then the back references and then the data attached to all of these specific objects. That's kind of what we're really trying to manage. And this is basically what I've done. I split it up in like to the artists and editions to keep them separate, and then I can keep the users and the record shop sort of in their own file as well to sort of like partition it out. But really, I could add as many, like if I want an extra record shop here, one of the things I want to look at for Oaken at one point is doing potentially having more of a focus on demo mode, where you could have a demo account that you set up and then you can run that potentially even in production. You can maybe even use that data that you then set up to like generate marketing screenshots with or something like that. I'm not quite sure yet, but that's something I would like to do at some point. Just because to me, the whole point of this is where if we reshape the problem we're working on, so it's not just like the test data, but it's also your development data, like the factories, fixtures, and the seeds, that if suddenly if the problem becomes that, we actually get hopefully some different solutions out of it where it's just more of a focus on like how do all these things actually fit together and what would our app look like if we suddenly had a stable data set that we could work with, as opposed to, again, in my mind, all the factory stuff that's always, let's pretend everything's anonymous. We're not working on anything. We got this, whatever, we'll just generate it. And then it has all these extra associations and you could add some traits to it. But at least for me, I just like, I lose track of what's going on. And I find it really difficult to like compartmentalize or figure out what we're doing and like, and hard to conceptualize. So again, different strokes for different folks and all that. So maybe this is not it, but stuff like that. Let's see, Raphael, you're saying run similar uses to generate staging data / QA data. Yes. Working with a QA engineer that is testing on similar data you write test on is very helpful. Yes. So the other idea with this is by reusing your seed data as like test data. The other idea is that for new people who are joining your team, the same data they see in their browser is also the data that they didn't test with. So it can start tying all these things together of how your domain model actually fits together. And because you're telling it in this like story-based way, where you got, actually, let me show you in the record shop file, where this functions kind of like your user setup would. So it sort of tells a story of like, oh, actually, the first thing we need is a warehouse. Cool. The next thing we then need is a user that we can tie back to that, like the record shop. And now we can tie back locations and then also assign that user to it as well in one go. And now we can start developing these like purchases and this like distribution stuff. So it sort of tells this a little bit story of how your app actually functions and what you need first and what comes next and what comes like third or fourth, whatever. Uh, let's see. Cool. I think, was that something else I wanted to show in here? I think this is kind of what I had for this app at least. Um, cool. Do, 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 do. This is something else I want to, I think I might want to show you in the test app I actually had. So this is Oaken itself. That's cool. So I was working on, maybe I want to show you the PR instead. So Don Christie was interested in switching to Oaken. He's got this Ears app, a podcast app he's been working on in public, I think, like just for like fun or whatever. And he's using fixtures. And so what I did was just like he was interested in switching to Oaken. He's like, okay, I'm curious to see what that would actually look like. So I just started. Here's just me bundle adding it. Just like that's it. Bundle add Oaken. There you go. Oh, I don't want to. I don't want to generate a new one. I wanted to go to the next tab or next commit. And here's me doing the same thing again. I have a DB seeds that was also not doing anything, where we have data in here, some more of these like whatever these feeds are, and in these users as well, where in this data folder, I'm now setting up, he has these OPML imports. OPML is a format for how you import podcasts, I think. Again, giving it a name. Here I'm attaching something to it. We're using active storage. Splitting all these feeds out so I can have however many I want to. Again, here I'm using one because he was using fixtures, so I'm just using the same name. Similar thing here, same syntax. I'm adding a helper method here. I'll show you that in a little bit. Splitting up to separate feed as well. So now the data that was previously in like one feed file and one entry file, they kind of get split out into multiple different files. It's easy to generate that. Oh, cool. Thanks, Al. Yeah, I've remember we talked about it. We're still assuming factor traits and we're saying alt names equal factor bar traits and we're amazingly helpful. Oh, you mean like realizing alt names are factor bar traits? Interesting. Is that what you're saying? Cool. And we got the setup phase again I'm using to set up some more defaults across these different files that are these different entities. And here's kind of maybe the weird thing here is this is actually just using something that's built into Ruby. They're called singleton methods. We'll look at them in a little bit. But I don't have to write any custom code for this to work. So if you do def, whatever the name is, dot create something, what you can do is like on these entries in your test, in your seeds, you can actually use that method and you can use them in test as well. So you can start having something that's kind of factory-like without really, I don't need to write any extra code for this in Oaken. This is just using Ruby. I'll show this to you in the, let's see here. If you do this, it's relying on something called singleton methods, which is, so if you have like an object, you just generate a new object. You don't really care what it is. You can do def object dot hello, and then we do this. I'm also using a single line method definition here, but so now you could do object.hello, and it works. So if you do object.singleton methods, it's in there, I think. Let's see. I'll just grep for yo here. Oh, do I need to do something else? Oh, right. I called it hello. I didn't call it yo. Cool. Um, let's see. What's something else I want to show with this? But basically, the idea is that this is spilled into Ruby. I don't need to do anything. So because I'm returning the same objects in your tests, all those helper methods you define are also available there, like automatically, essentially. Let's see, something else in the chat. Easy to access storage data. I hate that pure fixtures. We need to set up fixtures with a blob attachment every time. Yes, I'll show you that kind of, yeah. It's really annoying. I think there's something else with this like singleton stuff. I think so. You could also do an include a module or whatever. Like I'm a fan of just like abusing Ruby syntax until it does. Like let's now do we'll do it backwards this time. Is this gonna work? I need to use extend. It's this. Yeah, and it's already defined. Cool. And now we can do yo to get hello back. But this is like on instances you can do this kind of stuff because they also have a singleton class and things like it's like it's a whole deal. I can tell I don't have the brain capacity to explain it right now, but this is sort of what they work like. They're just called singleton methods. So if you want to look it up on like Ruby's documentation, you'd see it there. So you could also use extend to add a new module, and here I'm just like going nuts with Ruby syntax because this works. Um, to then add extra methods on this as well, and they would also be available in tests as well. Cool. So same deal here, setting a default. I had to set something else up because there's a callback. So I needed to do things in this way. And I'm also a fan of like trying out the one-liners and seeing how they work, like the inline things. You can also call super. That was the thing I forgot to show you. So if the object you're inheriting from also has, so like if we do like, I don't know, like now we're just doing this for fun. Uh good luck. Do this. Oh, I forgot to define. I actually want to reopen it, and then we do greet, and then we do no, let's do that again. Cool. So we do your new dot greet. So it's got that, but then if we do, oh yeah, okay. So now I actually need to, I screwed it up. I need to do your new, yo, cool. This, and then we do greet, and then we do def, and then we do, well, if I call super now, then that's kind of like defeats the point in a way, but what if you do it this way instead then? Uh, 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 cool. Like this, that works. And then we do this, and then we do we'll just reading singleton. Singleton grip. So now if you do this, we should see singleton instead. Yeah. So you can kind of, what's weird about this is you can super into these like if you override a method in your using the singleton stuff, you can also super right back into the actual classes definition. So I don't know. It's just a weird thing. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just letting super take care of it because I'm overriding the basic create to generate. I don't know if we're gonna have time to cover this like unique bias essentially, but that's what it looks like. Again, I'm splitting up these users into 1 and 2, mirroring what the fixtures were calling them. And this was again split up into multiple different files. You could see it in the fixtures in a little bit. This is me doing all the, I think this is done. And then I can go in and like delete all the fixtures. So one nice thing of what you saw before with these OPML imports was by default, if you're using active storage, you have to define these extra fixture files because active storage internally has these attachments that then are attached to these blobs, which hold the actual data. So you have to do something like this where the guides say you have to use the service name, call it text fixtures, and have to do some extra setup. But to be honest, it reads a little bit clunky. Have to get a file name, and it'll figure out how to generate this blob data for you, something like that. And then you give it a name, and then you can reference it from this attachment. Attachment is how a blob is attached to a specific object. So if you have like has one attached like avatar on a user, internally there would be a blob object which has a reference to the actual avatar data, the file, and then there'd be an attachment between the two. So you kind of have to maintain that yourself. I know some people were saying that in the chat. I think Raphael, maybe it was you. Entries as well has a bunch of stuff in it. Same deal. Like this is already kind of a lot with just like 82 lines for like these extractions here. I don't remember. This was also fairly simple. Again, you attach into feed. Resource here is a polymorphic association, but fixtures does allow you to specify the type. So you have to dereference the name as well because you use the same name across different types. So then you have to specify the type. Uh, and then there's all these followings where there isn't a ton of stuff to generate these. Like I think technically fixtures could generate these for you because it's like a join table. Let's see, some extra stuff in feeds, a bunch of stuff. Yep, fairly standard. Import extractions. Do you want to see anything else in here? Yeah, just tons of small files that do a bunch of different stuff. Here's that, like nothing in here. Playlist, anything else, yada yada, the same thing. Web subs, is there anything in there? Yeah, I commented out. Yeah. Cool. Cool. During my time, we don't find this is actually not relevant. Anything else I want to show in here? I think this is based on some of Dom's feedback. I think it was just like, oh, I thought the users were gonna be more, that would have more data to them, but it turns out a lot of the data was actually in feeds. So what I ended up doing was just copying the things over into one file. And then I figured there's some extra things where the data would actually create the followings manually. And there was a method to create the play later playlist. So since this is an active record user I get back, I just call that directly and then I don't have to do whatever this stuff is. And in the plays, when you generate a play in this podcast app, it'll automatically follow the feed. So I think I didn't do that, or did I already figure it out here? I don't remember. Two, yeah, following's there. So I'm just skipping that following here as well. And just let this play generate that in the background. Simplifies things a little bit. Cool. And now I can reference this playlist differently. So instead of before it had a name of like play later, so you have playlist.play later. But then I just figured, well, we got the user, so we can just grab that. I didn't grab the play later playlist from them. So that's what I'm doing instead, where I'm skipping this one name. So you can just grab it by reference instead. Slightly different. Cool. Let's see what else. Yeah, just me simplifying something. Sometimes I like using create with. This is me doing what you're not supposed to doing with like, hey, what if you fix this too? Sorry, I showed up. Oh, okay. Oh, you had to, okay. That's nice, Brian. Yeah. Okay, let's see what else. More things here. Here I'm combining these different defaults into on all these loaders. Basically, my thinking again with this default stuff is hopefully these should all be safe to add. Like there shouldn't be anything extravagant in all these defaults that would make them unsafe. So it should be fairly simple to like combine them together in a way, and just have them be there because Oaken will ignore them. So if there's a new thing you're creating that doesn't have this attribute, I'll just like filter it out. I'll only grab the ones that are relevant. To again give you the idea being that I'm trying to give you a lot of bang for your buck. And so in my experience, like Jamie, you were talking about this earlier with the traits where if they're defined well, then yeah, it works well. But in my experience, is like there's so much discipline that's required to get these things right. And then there's also seeds again, which often is like dilapidated or whatever. So my idea is like, what if we reframe this problem space so we have I lost my train of thought here. There's a lot to talk about with this. But the point being that if you reframe the problem space, suddenly we have like new ideas coming around and new takes on the stuff. And if it's like we could see these two potentially separate problems as like one problem, suddenly it changes what we're doing. Um, I lost my train of thought with the other stuff. Sorry about that. Let's see what else we need. This is also not kind of relevant. What does it do here? Some more refactoring. We don't see that. Um, so here was another thing I figured out with these like OPML imports. Previously, this was again split out across 3 different files where you had to have the extra source attachments and the blobs as well. So now I just figured out like, well, we're using this in one place. So I think it'd be easier to just add it inline instead. Make it pass the file directly. And then I added this helper method to generate whatever the blob details are, which ended up looking like this. And so now I'm using this setup phase again that Oaken had. So you can have, I'm splitting to only in the test environment as well. Here's also me using the setup again. There is like this potential quirk where if you don't reference one of the models, like we won't see it, you won't be able to call it in test. Good, bad, I don't know. So this is all loaded up automatically by Oaken. That we'll just like try to, in this current environment, we'll try to load a file called setup.rb, in the test environment. And then we'll also just whatever extra files you add. So you could add however many files you want to in this like setup directory. And you could also deeply nest them as well if you want to add extra helper methods that you can use within your Oaken files. And then they'll actually fall over into your test files as well. So I'm relying on Rails built-in file fixture, and then I'm generating whatever the details are from that we sort of like set up one place. And now this gets kind of condensed into whatever this is, and you could reuse this helper elsewhere. So this is the first time I sort of figured out you could do this. And because this is in the test environment, it won't get loaded in your development seeds. So that's kind of nice. You could define a method that's not automatically in your development environment. Because this file simply isn't loaded there. And I'm using def here because we're evaluating within this, I'm evaluating within this like Oaken seeds module, so it's safe. But then that's included in your tests. So that's why it's available there. Modules and everything. Let's see. Yeah, fixture. Yeah, that's kind of what I thought of it as. You're saying seeds, fixtures, and factors are different modalities of the same underlying problem. That's an interesting insight. To me, it was essentially that it was often this like weird split between both your test data and then like that development data. I'm like, it's kind of just data management in a way. And what are we actually trying to do? Because part of what I wanted to do with the Oaken stuff was try to make your object graph more visible and kind of explicit. So I'm using some of these explicit values and grounding in that specific stuff that then you can start tying it together of like how these things actually connect. That if you're in your mind's eye, you're kind of picturing this idea of these record shops that maybe are spread across like a few different towns or whatever. So you can start building that mental model using those specifics to then show you what the connections actually are to make it kind of physical. That was the idea with it, essentially. See, and then the reuse as well, where then you're using that discipline that you're putting in there to hopefully get more out of that than you would with like factories or fixtures, because both require a lot of discipline in my experience to sort of get right. And then you kind of get something that sort of works out of it at the end. And I'm like, what if we actually take that same amount of discipline or maybe even a little bit less and then hopefully get more out of that? That's the other idea with this, that it hopefully is easier to get better results using like the same amount of discipline or like slightly less, ideally. But some of this is still new. So what I've tried to do in the Oaken code base itself is also try to keep it fairly light. Like it's only 265 lines right now. I mean, I'm cheating a little bit because I'm using Rails's fixture setup. So fixtures wrap database tests in transactions that are then rolled back after the test. I'm just reusing that because it's like it's built into Rails. So I'm just like, okay, we'll borrow that. It was like a free win for me, so I didn't have to maintain it. I might have to change that at some point, but so far it works. Cool. Let's see, is there anything else to these commits here that I want to show? Dom had a suggestion. It's cool. This is a change that we didn't. So I think another thing that was interesting was when Dom was looking this over, looking over the PR I had, we talk about, wait, why are we doing things in this way? Could we just Don was basically asking me, why can't we just do this that we're doing with these verified, passing it as verified? Well, it turns out it's because there's a callback that was set up to de-verify before validation. So it would automatically flip it back to false because the email changed on new because we're assigning it. So I had to do this extra helper that would then use create, and then after that have to go in and like manually update the verify to be true. But then, so this gave us an excuse to suddenly start talking about the domain modeling that was done there and why it is. And I think it was like 3 years ago. And it's like, oh, well, if it actually defaults to verified false at the database column level, we could kind of swap what this is doing. I think Dom was saying that he was following like an authentication gem that suggested doing it with this callback or whatever. I was like, okay, we could do that. And then we could get it back to something that's kind of simpler in a way. We're just like, we'll just pass it explicitly here. It's fine. And then this isn't as gluttonous because we'll default to false, but you can now allow an explicit override if you want to. Cool. Anything else? Don't, this is a revert. Don't use that either. And then another thing Dom was pointing out was that he had made a rake task that was called feeds demo that basically had this stuff in it. So what I ended up doing here was like, okay, it sounds like, and Dom was saying this too, that most of the stuff that I'd actually added as like seed data was really only for tests. So what I ended up doing was grabbing a lot of this stuff and just putting it into the test directory. You can see here, dbc's feeds one, test feeds two, test setup as well. I'm just moving this stuff over into the test directory. I literally grabbed it in my editor and like dragged it over. And then test users as well, and it worked. It worked out of the box. It took me like 2 minutes. And then I added this in the development environment then because I don't want to share it with the test environment. I didn't add this like users demo, and because do I have it here? I have it here. Where are we at? Like DB seats. Because it's set up in this way, I didn't have to do anything else because I already like I set up the users are going to be loaded at some point. So that makes it safe to do this and get it out of the box. And it looks like this, I get some feeds and then create them and then yada yada, perform something on them. Oh, and that's it. Okay. Yeah, that was the last of it. Cool. Let me see. I'll put this in the chat if you want to look at it more for your on your own time. Where's the chat? Here it is. If you want to see the pull request. Cool, cool. We're coming up on an hour. I think this is a lot of the stuff I wanted to show. I don't know if I have anything specifically planned else. We could go take some look at the test suite as well. Or sorry, I mean the code base. Where is that at? Basically here. I don't know if there's anything else I want to show you actually, but I might be a little bit tapped out. That's the other thing. But yeah, this is kind of one of the files. The main file that I've structured Oaken around is having this like loader, kind of like Sitework does. So you could kind of override a whole bunch of stuff if you want to. I think can I show this to you? And if I do in console, is this sort? Or I need to fetch. I think I swapped the Ruby version. But yeah, if anybody's got any questions or concerns or anything like that, let me know. The chat thumbs up there. Cool. Okay, now we're watching Jim's. Cool. Cool. Got a hot. Yep. Thanks, Brain. Let me know how it goes. Happy to take a look at stuff as well, as long as it's like public or whatever. Yeah. I'll put this recording up on YouTube in a little bit as well. Let's see. How a specific test case. You mentioned a README setting up pagination data, but you may one spec. Yes, we can look at that too. Do you want to look what was I thinking of with this? Let's save this for a little bit later. So what I was showing in the what I want to show this here. Let's use the local checkout. So another thing I'm trying to figure out with Oaken is having like this concept of a root level model. That's basically what I'm doing in this app. Like the root level model here is record shop. So that's where I'm grouping around that. I have a record shop. So I have this like warehouse inc thing. And then I can have several other ones as well. So if I need to like split them out into different, like typically a root level model would be like an organization, an account, or like a team or something like that. But it's just a little bit like a way to mentally split things out. Then the next level thing is having a test DB seeds slash data for like data tables that you can look up. I think I can actually show this in Oaken itself. That might be better. Data here, plant DB seeds data, product, test data. Do I have anything here? Oh, that is not what I want. Data plans. So for instance, you could have this like DB seeds data plans table that I'm then setting something up in. And that's where I'm not quite there yet, but I was thinking of having something where you could then also run some of this in production. So it would be a way to have committed data in your, your data that's committed in Git that you could then like update continually if you have these plans in production, for instance, based on like some of this data essentially. But that's like a little bit further out. But the idea was then having a separate convention for having all your data lookup tables like segregated into one thing, and you can split that out by environment as well pretty easily. Um, and then there was a third convention we're thinking of that we're kind of playing around with, which is having, do I have it in here? Cases. So here it's in test cases pagination, where then you could have some other stuff you're doing. You can insert all on this and generate a whole bunch of, like, if you want to add 100 really quickly. Here I'm just using, instead of having something named, I'm just going through the association here where I'm just grabbing one account I've set up, grabbing the first menu, and from the items there, I'm just picking the first ID. And then I'm using that to set up all this extra stuff up. Cool. Maybe I should show you this is an Oaken's test suite itself. Oh, we haven't even covered section. That's all. Anyway, we'll skip that for now. Same deal. You can also use label if there's certain objects that you want to expose in your test to give them a name that you've created in a different way. You could do it like this. Let's see what else do we do. Label here, create, create, insert all. I'm still not sure how I feel about the insert all part, but I added just because it's kind of easy. Okay. So that's that setup. So the out of that rabbit hole, back to like the second rabbit hole, I think. Having specific cases you can add. So the idea was to have a convention of a cases folder. Originally, I only wanted it for tests because that was the only thing that made sense to me. But then someone else was saying, well, in development, you could also have a cases folder for like exactly the same thing with pagination, where you want to load them or like a performance monitoring thing, but you don't want to see that in your regular data. So what you could do instead would then have yeah, I could do that here. Load a Browse console. So you could do in your development, you could do like cases, whatever, and then you could do performance. So you could run this in your console, and then we'll again use the same lookup I had before with Oaken that I showed you with how it sees things. This is not going to find anything. I don't think so, no. But then it would go through and loop through those files and generate all the stuff you need for like performance case. And then you could nest those deeply if there's just, if you want to load all the performance cases, or if there's just like a a specific one, you can load that. Okay, hold on. Cool. So this brings us all the way back to, I think I have the pagination test. You can do this in testing then. Because you've set things up in this way, you're kind of hopefully getting more bang for your code buck again, because we're setting up with these like slightly more conventions. Since we're in the test environment, we'll automatically go into the test cases directory and find that pagination file you just saw before. This will not run outside of that, like those, this is within those database transactions. So it'll sort of load everything in there. I don't know how to fix that yet, but maybe it'd be nice if you didn't need to put it into setup or something like that. But I haven't figured out. There's like some other conditions based on that that I don't know how to fix yet. Like if you had, just to continue that thought, if you had something like this, there are some other things I would need to fix internally for it to work, because you want to roll that back. Some other test cases that don't want to get polluted with the data you're adding. I think fixtures somehow support this, but I haven't figured out how, or maybe they don't or something. I'm not sure. Yeah. But yeah, I hope this explains the question you were saying about like specific test cases. Yeah. So that's the idea. What's the, like, again, reframing this problem space to be like across environments, across the data across different environments. What else can we kind of do with it? Are there other conventions we could add? Are there things that, because we're seeing it from a slightly different perspective, what are the things pop out of that? Yeah, cool. Cool. Anybody got any other questions? I might be tapped out. This is kind of a lot, but yeah.
Hey, you got a second, Casper?
Yeah, of course.
So I've also bumped into the issue that you're just talking about now, and it's the same for RSpec. And in fact, I gave you some bad information about RSpec. Unfortunately, there's basically seed or load data before suite, and that's transactionally protected, becomes a rollback state. Everything else has got to be created on the fly. And it would be sweet if we could dynamically add it per test file. But the problem with that is if the tests are being run randomly, how do you dynamically load that chunk of Oaken or fixture in?
Yep. Yeah,
Uh,
and I don't have a good point on that. Basically, because that becomes a really difficult problem all of a sudden, and then it's like,
yeah,
well, how much are we getting out of that versus just amortizing that cost across, like, maybe adding the extra record or splitting it up by environment so you don't load all the data in the test or whatever. You kind of want that minimal suite. Yeah.
yeah.
And then
But the
hopefully the idea with Oaken being that then you have the flexibility to change your mind and make it a little bit easier to see what's going on. Um, oh, let's see, do I have anything else?
just one quick comment.
Mhm.
Um, the flip side, however, is Oaken's internal name a record. It's the symbolic naming of an instance of a record is really helpful. And in the RSpec world, it's an interesting conundrum in that if you create records dynamically, you're forced to create them in lets, which are also naming conventions. All
Right.
right. But in reality, Oaken lets you simulate what we're talking about in before blocks very nicely. And if we could use the Oaken names for records generated in the before block, we wouldn't have to do the double layering into the let blocks or let statements. So Oaken actually has the potential of simplifying RSpec considerably.
Interesting. Okay.
And
Yeah, and
I owe you that write up, but life got complicated. So
oh
I
yeah.
promise I will follow up on it and explain more.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. I'm definitely interested in reading that because RSpec is not my strong suit. I've used it a few times, but for the most part, it's just been mini tests. So that's where I'm like mostly know things. And again, then it
Yeah.
becomes a kind of, again, difficult problem because everybody has different apps, different data in there. So mostly what I try to do in Oaken is try to have like the core ideas in there, keep them kind of hopefully solid. And then again, it is 265 lines of code right now. So it's not the worst, hopefully, to like use and figure out. And I put it in a README that it's like, I think I have it right here, a README or time to where I have it, so many words. Yeah, pick up in an hour or less. That was sort of the idea. That that it's actually for both things. That both you want to try to make something that's hopefully easy to pick up based on hopefully if you read the README that it makes sense. And then the same thing for if you're trying to read the code base itself, that if you dive in, you should sort of ideally take less than an hour to comprehend most of it. You know, caveat there, but that's one attempt I'm doing as well. So we don't have, I was actually surprised because I was doing like a comparison between the lines of code on some of the other ones. I think Fixtures was about 800 lines. FactoryBot was about 1900 lines, which I was really surprised by. That's just what it happens when a thing that's been around for 10 years and maybe I counted wrong or whatever. I don't know. Um, yeah, just like an
That's
extra data
because it's
point.
a dessert and a floor wax, in the immortal words of SNL.
Okay, cool. Cool. Just for everybody, so you know, Pal is using this in production. He's using Oaken in production or like in your
Yeah,
test.
I've converted 100% of my factory bot test suite, and I've now used it to generate synthetic data for my demo environments as well. And I found the environment, the layering that Oaken gives you with uh, by environment was remarkably valuable and helpful.
Cool. Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, that's kind of what I was hoping for. And the other thing with all of these ideas and trying to condense them was that I think a lot of Rails apps have these kind of homegrown versions. Someone else actually wrote me in the repo when I announced this event thing, where they're saying, "Well, I got this thing where I've got these modules that I'm kind of including to generate some of my own seed data." I'm like, and by the way, that stuff is great. What I was more hoping to do with this stuff was like trying to standardize it a little bit more, so that hopefully something we could kind of come together on and maybe formulate a little bit more of a conclusion on how do we deal with some of these things, how do we actually have conventions that are a little bit more Rails like or something. That was sort of my hope with it. Because I just, for me, I found fixtures really frustrating to work with, for instance, and that's like the Rails default, and it's like, yeah, it's not 2004 anymore. I think we do something else. But anyway, and there's a reason most people like don't like them because they're not very pleasant. And even in a demo app I was trying to set up, I was like having issues with them as well. And of course, factors let you start faster because they're optimized for isolation, but then it becomes the same old thing of like being difficult over time. Actually, someone else that was looking into Oaken had an interesting thing that I was hoping for that people would have, but uh, which is that they found that because we're trying to explain things like this, where we're sort of tying things together, that it was easier for them to see how their data model was actually working for them and where things might not feel right or something in a way that it just hadn't before. And I thought it was really interesting. It's one of the things I was hoping for, again, with like this idea of like trying to show more of the object graph to reveal more of the app kind of quickly. Um, so I was really pleased with that. That was one of the takeaways I was hoping people would have. Cool. Let's see. Yeah. More YAML in your life. Um, cool. That's almost, you said, what did you say? How I need more YAML in my life, but it's interesting that you could almost, what is it? YAML stands for YAML markup, but there's also, but ML could also stand for my life. So I figured, yank something out of my life. I don't know if you want to do a different version of YAML. Let's see, Cicely, you're asking other question regarding test cases. If I really want a case with data isolated from the regular open data, is there a way for a specific test to only load the case data? I don't think so, not right now. Um,
Yes,
I
but
mean,
not transactionally. So it would be loaded per
oh,
test.
yeah, I guess you could opt out of that. I think the way I see it with the cases, they're kind of in addition to the regular case or the regular data. That's another thing too. I should probably explain this too. When you're working with something like fixtures or whatever, what do I have with the distribution? Where was that at? Distributions controls. Basically, what you want to do is instead of what I see a lot that people run into if they swap from like factories to something like fixtures or maybe something like Oaken is that because we're seeding things ahead of time, suddenly there's data in the database. And then they tend to be like, wait, I had tests that were doing like, what would they be doing? Like assert some like a count or whatever, assert or like assert empty or whatever. You have an order, whatever, I don't know, assert equals 0 or something. And all of a sudden that has like 3 orders in it or whatever. So basically the way you want to flip your mental model around for that is testing more of the delta. I can actually show you this in the, where are we at? The ears, what do we do? Assert difference. Yeah, there's something here. So basically what you want to do instead is testing something like this, where you're doing, this kind of has an implied +1 that it'll increment it to 1. And then you can wrap it around some sort of in a block essentially that, so I just want to assert that something happens within the scope of this rather than making like an assertion that like what is it, like assert equal user count is like equal to 1. So that's the way you kind of do that to get around that you're not asserting on the total, you're asserting on the delta. I don't know if that helps for what you're talking about with the specific cases. I don't have a great answer for that because it's kind of, I don't know, it also gets kind of difficult. Another thing, I should show that too. Let's see, just distribute, what's that? Oh, this is because it's, no, it's in here. Oh, wait, no, it's not here. Uh, yeah, that's the RSpec version you put in your helm. Yeah, that's weird. Okay, cool. Um, sorry, I wonder if there's anything else. Cool. If anyone else has got other questions, let me know. Otherwise, I think it might be a fine time to wrap it up. Let me, did this make sense at all? Like, part of the issue for me, also why the readme is very wordy and why this can kind of get a little bit like scrambly is because it's like, well, first I want to explain like, here's what people run into with factories, and then here's what people run into with fixtures, and then like, and so it's just a lot of context to then walk people through. But it's also just, I wanted to show that this is based on my experiences working with those two things and what I found kind of suboptimal, let's say, with it. Cool. Cool. Thanks, Eric. I wonder if uh, yeah, definitely, Jamie. Yeah, I was hoping that this would be more like an overall demo because it's kind of tough to really show it. It was just giving people some extra tools in addition to what the README is trying to explain. And so hopefully if you go back and check out the README or maybe you can read the code, it'll make more sense in terms of how things are put together. Because yeah, this is kind of a lot and it's like a slightly different way of working, but like it kind of works for me. Thanks, Al. Yeah, thanks so much. Glad it's working out for you. Cool. Um, David, it's not so tied to actual record itself. So this is one of the things I was trying to, it kind of is and it kind of isn't. Originally I wanted it to be used for more projects, but then it just became kind of difficult. Like it was just like to both support active record, but in potentially also something else. So that's why I wanted to keep the API fairly simple. Like these objects that are like generated based on a method missing hook or like an explicit register call. They respond to create, upsert, and then also attributes for, and that's roughly it. You can actually plug in your own as well. Where are we at? So by the way, this is the original. When I talk about a riffing thing I did, this is the file I used. So you can see this is now my edit history and how I went about it. Um, Rewinding it, yeah, the different names that I got distracted with. Um, and what else I wanted and what I was exploring. There's something with stock 4 there or something. Yeah, yeah, and that's kind of it. Uh, yeah, and then went back and forth on it. Can play it again. Yeah, just like going back and forth and like, do I want this person? Do I, what else do I want? And no, I don't want this and chop this and stuff. This doesn't make sense. So yeah, cool. And it's just like an unsafe file essentially. And then I copied it over when I was done with it. Oh, and then I don't want the D there. Cool. I think there's one more thing I want to show you with the you're mentioning how tight it was to active record. So internally in Oaken, I got this active record store, Oaken stored active record, which is what gets generated. So the things that respond, you can see here, create and upsert, and then we also got where is it attributes for, and then there's some defaults as well. There's a label as well. So it does respond to a few different things, but I overall wanted to keep it fairly light. So you could plug in your own, these are called providers. I actually want to change this to provider, but so this is what I'm trying to show. So what you got here is you got, if you do oaken.seed, what it actually does is it'll call loader.seed. So that's also why earlier when you saw loader.defaults is on here. I don't know if I have anything set up. I have a name and a title. Okay. So what you can do, for instance, if you want to swap it out for your own thing, you do provider, and then you could do here I could just plug in the same one. What and then you get a new loader that has all the usual defaults, but it just overrides that one thing. I think it would actually just like see if it. I don't think I'm doing any validation on. Let's just do object, just to show that it overwrote that. So you could respond to your own interface. I think it would have to respond to new and take in, yeah, basically this interface, new, pass in the loader as well, and you get the specific type, which is the underlying, like if you're talking about accounts, it's the underlying account model. And then you could do stuff with that. Here's where I'm grabbing out those defaults from the loader based on just the column names. So you can share all those defaults and then I'll just split it out like this right here. But yeah, you can write your own. I'm trying to make this loader concept fairly flexible. So you could kind of you could swap out this locator, you could swap out these lookup paths. Well, setup is actually internally. That's when I'm using this context. That's the module where we'll add all those methods to. Um, and that's the one that's also included in test. I can show you that as well. If you want to see that. There is an RSpec thing in here as well. RSpec setup. So you require this file and we do this. Uh, Again, I'm not an RSpec expert, so Mikkel, a friend of mine, helped me with that. And then the test setup. This is a little bit more tricky. I'm doing a bunch of meta programming here, but this is what you included in the, where was it at? Test helper. You do include Oaken.test setup, but it's a little bit tricky because I have to do some stuff because if Rails is parallelized its test suite, it'll run this block. But if it's not parallelized, it won't run this block at all. So I can't use this. So I have to do something else where it hijacked mini tests before setup and then I have to super into that. But then I only want to run this once. So I'm like I'm removing the method on the module we are. So a little bit tricky, but yeah. So that's that. And then there's only certain cases. If we're not paralyzed, we shouldn't be planning this. We still want to like just like chop the method. But yeah. So yeah, that's that. Do you want to say anything else about the loader? Yeah, kind of works like this. Could swap these things out if we want to. This is the test fit up thing we just ran. A register here that's called automatically based on like a method missing hook somewhere. Here's the definition location where I'm trying to extract where it was called from. Um, Here's that automatic setup phase where I'm just like blocking it with an instance variable where I'm using the same logic we're using for finding other things, and then I'm just loading each of whatever we find there. Yeah, cool. When we load a specific file, we just like context eval on or class eval on the context, which is that module from earlier. So yeah, that's kind of roughly it. There's with where you can override everything. We'll just like add all these defaults, and you can add your own overrides if you want to. So we use the same, or you can add just like one thing. Cool. Oh, I think this is actually I changed my mind on that. Cool. That documentation is wrong. It's just like it's cool. Oh, it's stuff in the chat. Let's see. First up, you're saying love this. Also find the Oaken plus riffing approach very interesting to come up with slash refine the domain model. Yes. That's actually been the thing I showed you with the riffing file. I tend to start whatever makes sense. Yeah, yeah, this is well, I mean, I tend to use untitled buffers. This is my editor just like titles it from what's at the start. I think we'll actually update here. Hello. Okay, great. But this is still untitled just because it took me like, I don't know, 40 minutes to write some of this up and play around with it. Um, but in the past, I've done several different things. Jeremy, you're on the call. We've done a bunch of videos on YouTube about this as well. We started in a bunch of different places, but now because I'm more familiar with how Oaken structures things, it's been really helpful to me to just like start with that instead, because it gets me really far really fast. Another thing I found out this time around when I did this was that it's actually okay to override the local variables, just because it makes it really easy to have Ruby forward them here. So I don't mind that this release here is set here and then it gets overridden down here. Um, I don't mind that cascade in a way. Like you have to be careful, but I don't know. It seemed like it was easier than like a lot of the other things that people get into to try to make this kind of work. Um, yeah, and then it's like 31 lines to, express of quite a bit of like a domain model. See whether or not it makes sense. Cool. Um, but yeah, and then you can dip into the implementation. So I actually use this as well on there's a client thing I worked on that was really difficult. Like they had this thing with just like catalogs and like cascading prices and everything. It was like they wrote me out this like markdown thing of like I think the system does this, it does this, and then it does this, and I was like, this is kind of really difficult. So for me, what I find really difficult when people are trying to explain things in like documents, like I can't see it. So I started just grabbing some of that context out and start converting into what Oaken would call it. And then all of a sudden, it's like, oh, now I can see how these things are tied together. And it gave me some ideas for how I want to structure like the domain modeling method or whatever. And it's like, oh, this makes sense, or another one here or whatever. So that's kind of the way I figured that out over time. And then I plugged it into made that file executable. So I could actually just I have just ended up sending like a gist to the client. And so you could just copy that gist, run it on their own machine and have it all like running in one file. So just like binding at the end of it, I just did what's it like binding.rb. And then it kind of just worked, which is kind of nuts. But you could also define anyway, there's a whole you could actually find it on the something else where I want to show that here. If you go to that's Dom. Someone else actually showed that as well. They contributed to it. What was it? The one that was added here? Brian, I don't know if you made the call. I think you signed up. But yeah, this is what it looks like. You can set this up, grab this like memory record, establish a connection to an in-memory SQLite database. Then you can define active record models in line in the same file. And then you can also create this like create table in line as well. And then the solver will work. And then you can reference it and then fire off a console And then that's one file you could send to people and you can just run it. Check out the modeling as well. Yeah. So that's for the modeling part of that. Just wrap it up with something else. Cool. And that was so when I got that client thing working using Oaken first, then started backfilling in the in-memory tables and all that, and then finally make it run. It was like, oh, now I can actually explore the domain modeling, but I wasn't hamstrung by migrations or anything like that. It's like, oh, this is it's pretty fast actually to figure something out. And again, you could send it to coworkers or whatever. This is kind of how it works. I might structure things a little bit differently, but yeah, this is like the case for it. Let's see, serving these users. At first, we were creating only a few users' accounts and started referencing these users in other root seed files. In your opinion, should be only data/seeds that we can be referenced. That's also one of those like hard problems. Thanks, Jamie. It's so dependent on your own data structure. I find that it's hard to say. If you want to, you can write to me more about it if you end up exploring this or something. I find it tough to like say that now. Maybe, maybe not. I definitely want to be careful with things, but I don't know. Cool. Um, cool. Yeah, I think that's kind of what I got. Let me cool. I'm gonna stop the recording. Thanks. See.